making this video to gloat. Hi everyone! Welcome to the channel. My name is Cameron. If you've been here before, I'm so glad to have you back. If you haven't been here before, welcome to the channel. I make videos about books and reading and readers and top 100 books of the century so far. Listen, I really was not planning on making a part 2 video to the one I made a few weeks ago, but the readers list of top 100 books of the century so far came out. And first of all, I want to say 3 of the books that I said should be on the list in that first video, we'll call them the book review list, and then the readers list. How about that? 3 of the books I said should have been on the book reviews list were on the readers list. So, actually 3.5. I'll explain that to you in a minute. But yeah, so today we're just gonna kind of go over some of the books I've read off of that list, the differences between the two lists, and I think we're gonna dive a little bit into the thoughts I had in that first video about are authors and publishing professionals just saying certain things so that their reputation can be maintained. I don't know, we'll talk about it a little bit more. But first, let's go over the books that I thought should have been on the list and were on the readers list. I'm extremely happy about this one. I spent time in that last video talking about how Demon Copperhead was my favorite book of last year. This Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. And it was 61 on the book reviews list. And I did not agree with it. I thought it should have been ranked much higher. And the readers agreed with me because it was number 1 on this list, which I was delighted to see. I truly think it's one of the best books. It is the best fiction book I've read in the past several years. I think it is so good. It's an exploration of Appalachia and poverty and living life as an addict. It is so good. I don't think I need to go into it more other than I completely agree with the fact that it should be the number 1 book on this. It was one of 2 books I read on the book review list that I had actually read. I'm glad to see it cross over. I'm glad it was number 1 because I think it deserves it. Another book that I said should be on the list was A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I have talked before about how that book wasn't necessarily my cup of tea, and I wouldn't personally put it on my top 10 books. It would probably end up in my personal top 100 books, let's be clear, but it wouldn't end up in my top 10 books. And this is a taste and preference. A lot of people love the book. I don't love the plot. I really don't love the ending. And that's all I'm gonna say. One thing I did feel about that book, the writing, the prose of it was just gorgeous. It was so well done. And a lot of my issues with the plot don't have to do with the writing of the plot. I was hoping for other things, you know? This one did end up on this list. It was number 11 on the list. I was shocked that it wasn't on the book reviews list. That definitely seems like the type of book that like critics and publishers and authors would just eat up. So I was shocked to see it wasn't on that list, but it did make it onto this list. The other book that I said should have been on the list, and I actually made a short a few weeks ago about how significant this book is, especially to Gen Z and younger, but that's The Hunger Games. I was so upset that it was not on the book reviews list, but it did make its way onto the readers list at number 56, which I was just delighted by. Truly, I think it's one of the best trilogies. It's one of the best trilogies that's been written in my lifetime. Let me be clear. All of this stuff that I'm saying is my personal opinion. Please do not take my word for Bible. That's not what it's here for. It was one that I thought should have been on the list. I would put it in my top 10 books of the century so far, just because of how hugely significant it is. And it's honestly just so good. It's so good. If you have somehow avoided it at this point, please pick up the trilogy and read it. But I was delighted to see The Hunger Games. The half point that I gave myself, I said in that original video that I thought Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart should have been on the top 100 list. I think Douglas Stewart's prose is excellent. I think Mungo is just a character that just leaps off the page. It's so good. He actually wrote a book that I haven't read before, just before Young Mungo, and it's his more well-known book. I probably should have predicted that his more well-known book would be more likely to get up on the list, but his other well-known book, Shuggie Bain, Shuggiebin, Shuggie Bain, actually ended up being 98th on this list. So I'm giving myself a half point because I want to. But regardless, I was very happy that a lot of my predictions for what I thought would be on the list that didn't end up on the book reviews list ended up on the readers list. I felt vindicated. Maybe I should say that. Let's go over the books that I have read on this list. I actually have read 12 of these books, as opposed to the 2 I read on the original publishing list, the book review list. We'll just kind of go down the list of the ones that I have actually read from this list. And I also want to say, before we get into anything, I also recognized significantly more of the books on this list. There were only about 30 books out of this list that I was like, I'm not familiar with it. 70 of them I was familiar with. Even if I haven't read them all, I recognized covers, or I've had other people I've watched videos for recommend them and stuff like that. So, the 12 books that I read were, number 1, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I've already talked about that book. I just adore it. I think it's so good. I just finished number 7, which was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I have another video with my thoughts about this book, but let's just say it would not have ended up in my top 10. Number 8, which was number 1 on the book reviews list, which was My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. It is the first book of the 4-part Neapolitan series, and it's just about Italian kids growing up together and the effect that they have on each other, and it's very much like a slice of life kind of book, but I actually did really enjoy the book. I think it's very well written. It's really well translated. The book is originally written in Italian, so the fact that the translated book made it this high up on both lists just shows the testament of how good that translation is, because there is a very real possibility that the translation could have been poor enough that not a lot of English readers read it. That was just my spiel about translation. Put some respect on good translators' names. This translator's name is Anne Goldstein. That book was number 1 on the book reviews list and number 8 on the readers list. And you know what? I think that's well deserved. I think it's a great book. Then we have number 11, which was A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I've already kind of explained that, but I feel like I should say again how shocked I was to see that it was not on the book reviews list. Another book that I said should be on the list was number 33, which was The Book Thief. Is there any more to say about that book? I've already kind of gone over it.
Did I go over it?
Hopefully I did. I'll do another recap of it, but this was one of the ones that I said should have been on the list. God, I love this book. It is such an interesting book about the Holocaust, and the Nazis were known for doing such things as burning books and banning books. So, don't ban books. It is about a young Jewish girl who is put into hiding, and she steals books to essentially keep herself entertained. And there is something so interesting. It is definitely aimed for younger readers, but it's so good. It's narrated by Death, which is already such a poignant fact, and it's also just such a significant piece of, even though it's fictional, it's such a significant piece of Holocaust literature. It is so good. It truly, I just love that book. It's a long read, and it's a little like, it's an easy read, but it's long. So if you haven't read it yet though, you should definitely check it out, because I just adore that book. I think it's so good. And then at number 44, we have The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, which is a historical fiction about a city where Black people and Jewish people lived together and worked together. I don't know if I would put it in my top 10, but I did enjoy it when I read it. I read the audiobook version, which was really, really well done. I don't really have much more thoughts about it. It was not a standout book for me, but I was also, when I saw it on the list, I was like, excellent. I love that this is on here. It's honestly really good. Another one by that author was also on that list, and I didn't recognize it, so I put it in like my 30 books that I didn't recognize, but it was by an author that I recognized. Honestly, if I had been thinking about it harder, I also would have put this one on my should have been in the top 100s, or like I predict it should be in the top 100s, but that's The Song of Achilles. Yeah, 2 of her books were on here, and they're both Greek myth retellings. I enjoyed the book. A lot of people just love the book. In the same way, it's beautifully written, it's very poignant. This is the first time I personally have thought that Patroclus has been so humanized, like he could just jump off the page, because he's so often left behind in the story of Achilles. So him taking the main, like, position and being the main narrator is an interesting choice. It's an excellent choice, but it's interesting. At 56, The Hunger Games, which I have already said enough about, but oh, I just love The Hunger Games. I love it so much. Number 68 is actually a book that I read very recently, like last month. I read it and then this list came out and I was like, oh good, another one. But that is The Devil in the White City. It's a historical nonfiction, which I thought was interesting. I think this list has a lot more of an array of stuff. Like, I feel like a large majority of the book reviews list was literary fiction, whereas this one's a lot more spread out, in my opinion. But The Devil in the White City is about the construction of the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893, and it's also told alongside the murders by H.H. Holmes, who is one of America's most prolific serial killers. I had actually never heard of him before I picked up this book. It provides a lot of context to the World's Fair and how H.H. Holmes was like getting as many victims as he did. It's very interesting. I really enjoyed it. So when I saw it on this list, though, I was a little bit surprised because I personally wouldn't put it in my top 10. It was a pleasant surprise. I was not upset about it. And then at 72, which was the first book I read this year and still stands up as my favorite memoir I've read this year, which was Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. On my original video, I originally said that I thought that I'm Glad My Mom's Dead is what should have been on that list, and that's Jeanette McCarty's memoir. And they're kind of toying the same lines. Jeanette's book describes a much more abusive relationship with a mother who essentially forced her into show business and didn't give her, but was one of the leading causes for the reason why she has OCD and an eating disorder. So that one's much harsher, and it's also, I thought a lot more people would put it on their list because, first of all, Jeanette McCurdy is a person that a lot of us have seen on TV when we were growing up. She's just more in the limelight, maybe I should say. So when I originally put on my list that I thought I'm Glad My Mom's Dead, I was surprised it was not on the list. It's genuinely not because I thought it was the best memoir I read. It was one of the best, but it was because I thought more people would identify it. That being said, I am delighted to see Michelle Zauner's memoir about Crying in H Mart, and Michelle Zauner is the lead singer of Japanese Breakfast, and she is hugely talented. If you've never heard any of her music or anything like that, hugely talented, but essentially she just wrote this memoir about the loss of her mother, and her mother died from a really horrific stage 4 cancer. I don't remember the exact type right now. She also describes about how she felt like she lost a lot of, because she's biracial, she lost a lot of her Korean heritage in the loss of her mom. So it's about her, a lot of the story details when she comes home and lives with her parents to help take care of her mom. But oh my goodness, I think this book is just excellent. I'm delighted to see it on this list. I thought other books would go over it, but super happy that this one made it. I think it's so good. If you haven't picked it up, you definitely should. Number 73, right below that, was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows by J.K. Rowling. I gotta be honest, I think this one's on the list for pure nostalgia. And I can make a whole video about this sometime. If you guys are interested in this, I can make a whole video about Harry Potter. How I don't necessarily think it's as good as everybody thinks. I'd love to eventually make a video about how bad the world building of that series is. We'll see. I'm constantly in a position. All I really have to say about this is I don't think it's better than a quarter of this list. Than the lowest quarter of the list. I wouldn't have personally put it on my top 10, and also trans women are women. And J.K. Rowling can stop. Anyway, the last book that I have read on this list, Remarkably Bright Creatures at 93. This book is so silly. I just love it. It is about a much older woman, an elderly woman, who volunteers at her aquarium, her local aquarium, and she has gone through a lot of hardships. Her son disappeared very suddenly, so she's still kind of reeling with the loss of that even 50 plus years later. And then it also details the story of a young man who just moved into this aquarium town, to the town with the aquarium. The aquarium is the main part of the town. Anyway, the really fun part about this book is a lot of it is narrated by an octopus in the aquarium. It's so fun! I think it's so fun! I had such a good time reading this book. I'm gonna let you read it, but it's kind of a mystery. It's kind of a literary fiction. It's kind of like it's a lot of things, and I had so much fun reading this book. I was delighted to see this book on this list. You should definitely read it if you haven't gotten the chance. I know I didn't explain it very well, but you should read that one. So that is all the ones that I've read. So I do want to discuss a little bit more about the fact that a lot of this list is far more recognizable to me than the other list. I want to say I probably recognized 40 or less books on that other list. And we gotta remember that the book review list was comprised of essentially reading professionals. So it was a lot of authors, it was a lot of people in the publishing industry, there were some critics, there were some like celebrities that have celebrity book clubs and are like known for reading. My big thing that I said in that original video was I was concerned that they were picking books that would make them look more esteemed and better and stuff like that. That's how it personally felt to me, especially with how little of the list that I recognized, along with the fact that large majority of the list was literary fiction, so not really a lot of genre fiction, so not a whole lot of like sci-fi, or there was quite a bit of historical fiction, but not so much sci-fi and not so much mystery, and not a lot of that. And there also was just like a disturbingly low amount of non-fiction. There might have been one or two memoirs on here, but the readers list had a lot more memoirs. The readers list, I know the book Cast was on there, which is a lot about historical context of how people who were not white were treated. There were a lot more historical non-fictions in this list, and some more memoirs, and more genre. I mean, dystopian literature with the Hunger Games was on the readers list. So I thought the comparison of them was interesting. And I also think there is a direct correlation with the publishing industry. And I haven't researched any of this. I'm really truly just yapping. These are my personal opinions. But it might also have something to do with the publishing industry and what is being pushed more. So, like I said, I recognize 70 of the books on this list just by their covers, or other people have been talking about them, or whatever. And truly, maybe it's just the creators that I consume and I watch talking about the books that they've consumed. Because it does kind of get a little echoey chambery, like in the book creator space, which is why I try very hard to read lots of different genres and take a lot of your guys' suggestions. So I definitely think that is affecting the readers list very much. But I also would love to check the numbers of how many readers like submitted, because there were 503 people who submitted for the book reviews list. And I would guess there's significantly more readers that submitted. Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. And obviously, those people in the book review are professionals in their field, with the exception of maybe the celebrities with the book club. But like, they're making money doing that, so technically they're professional book creators, if that makes sense. I don't know, I was just so interested in that. I thought that was so strange that that would be the case. And it does make sense in my mind, but I'm almost wishing that the book review list was done anonymously, which I know they wouldn't want to do because they can definitely like capitalize off of being like, here's Stephen King's top 10 books of the century. But I understand why they did it and they didn't make it anonymous, but there is a little part of me that's wondering how different the book reviews list would have been if it were anonymous. And that's just my opinion. Readers don't necessarily feel that way. Readers can kind of put whatever they want. And even if it's like quote unquote embarrassing to put the Hunger Games on their top 10 list, at the end of the day, it's not going to affect their reputation as much as it might hypothetically affect someone else's reputation, you know? The only author I can even think of is Stephen King. I know way more authors did that list. Yeah, so I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts on that. I do want to know what you guys are thinking, which list you aligned more with. If I'm totally wrong and the rest of you guys comment down below, oh, I related to the book reviews list more, then my bad, my bad, my bad. But I would be willing to bet that a lot of us would relate more to the readers list. Please let me know your thoughts on that discussion. Would you have preferred the book reviews list to be more anonymous? Do you relate to one list more or another? Is there a specific book you were shocked to see didn't appear on either list? And I know we're coming to the end of the video, but I also feel like I should mention a lot of these lists are very American-centric, and I know this is the New York Times list, but I really want to say there's only a few books that were translated books on the readers list. So, if you are from another country and you were like, there is this book that is published in Spanish, or there's this book that is published in Swahili, or whatever language you speak first, that you think should absolutely belong on this list and it just wasn't reaching an American audience, please let me know. I would be delighted to know that. I was shocked to not see Babel on either of these lists, and maybe it's just because Babel is still a fairly new book. My mind was blown by that book. I think it is so good. That is really all I have for you today. Please comment your thoughts down below. I want to hear them very, very badly. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. If you went back and watched the other video and also enjoyed that video, if you like 2 of my videos, there's a good chance you might like the rest of my channel. So you could give a little subscribe down here, I think. Thank you all so much for joining me. I post shorts 5 days a week minimum. I post longer videos like this every single Sunday. Today, tell me how many of the books on the readers list that you've read. Also tell me how many books on the book review list have you read, because I'm also very curious to know that. And of course, go visit and support your local library. I will see you all later. Goodbye.